Please! The word shattered the midnight silence like broken glass. Just one night. Rachel's hands froze on the wine glass she was rinsing. The voice behind her made every muscle in her body lock up. James Kang stood in the kitchen doorway at midnight, still wearing his tailored suit from the dinner meeting, his tie loosened, his dark eyes burning with something that made her breath catch in her throat. "Mr. Kang, She turned slowly, her back pressed against the marble counter. "This isn't right." "I know you saw everything." He stepped closer. She could smell his cologne, expensive, intoxicating. "In my wife's bedroom. You saw what she said to me, what she did." Heat flooded Rachel's face. She had seen it, had witnessed the most powerful crime boss in Seoul on his knees, begging his wife for intimacy, for connection, for anything. And she'd watched Victoria Kang destroy him with 3 cold words. "Not tonight, James." "I should go to my room." But Rachel's feet wouldn't move, couldn't move. Not when he was looking at her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. "One night, Rachel." His voice cracked with raw desperation. "Just let me forget. Let me feel something real for once." This was wrong. He was her employer. She was his housemaid. She'd come to Seoul running from a past she couldn't escape. Not for this. Not for him. But when his hand reached out, hovering inches from her face, her body betrayed every rational thought she'd ever had. Her pulse hammered, her skin burned where he wasn't even touching her yet. "We can't," she whispered, even as her body swayed toward him like gravity. "I know." His thumb brushed her cheek and electricity shot straight through her core. "Tell me to stop." She should. God, she should. But the way he looked at her, like she was the only real thing in his carefully constructed world, made her forget every reason she'd buried herself in this job. Made her forget everything except the ache building in her chest. "I can't," she breathed. And when his lips crashed into hers, 3 months of suppressed tension exploding between them, Rachel realized she'd just made the most dangerous mistake of her life. She'd fallen for the man she worked for, the man who was married, the man whose world could destroy her with a single phone call. If you're already hooked and want to see how deep this forbidden obsession goes, smash that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me if you'd risk everything for one night of passion, and hit that like button because this story is about to take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't forget. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. This is the kind of story that stays with you long after it ends. 3 hours earlier, James Kang, the man who made Seoul's criminal underworld bow, stood outside his wife's bedroom door, trembling, not from fear, from desperation. Victoria didn't even turn around when he knocked. Her voice cut through the door like a blade. "Go away, James." "Victoria, please," his voice cracked. "We need to talk. About us. About—" "There is no us." She finally turned to face him, and her smile was cruel. "There hasn't been for 2 years. You know that. We're married. We made vows." "We made a business arrangement." Her eyes were ice. "Your family needed my family's connections. My family needed your money. That's all this ever was." "But we could try." He stepped closer, and she stepped back like he was contagious. "Just one night. We could—" "No." The word was final. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. I've spent 2 years making sure you'll never have what you want from me, James. I'm very good at my job." The truth hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't just refusing him. She'd been deliberately sabotaging any chance of intimacy, of connection, of anything resembling a real marriage, month after month, year after year. "Victoria, please, you can't be this cruel. We haven't been together in months, just tonight. Get out." Her smile widened. "And close the door behind you. I have a call to make." From the hallway shadows, Rachel had seen everything. She shouldn't have been there, shouldn't have witnessed her employer's humiliation, but she'd been coming back from the laundry room when she'd heard his voice, heard the raw pain in it, and her feet had stopped moving. She'd watched the most powerful man she'd ever known reduce himself to begging, the billionaire crime boss on his knees outside his own wife's bedroom. And then his eyes had met hers. In that moment, something shifted, something that would change both their lives forever. 3 months earlier, Rachel had stepped off the plane at Incheon International Airport with one suitcase, a work visa, and a heart full of desperate hope. Seoul stretched before her like a neon promise, glittering, massive, overwhelming. She wasn't here for adventure. She was here because London had become impossible, because her ex-boyfriend David had made sure everyone in their neighborhood knew her business, because the whispers had become too loud and the shame had become too heavy, and sometimes running away was the only option left. The agency had been her lifeline. Domestic workers needed in Seoul. Good pay, room and board included. No experience necessary. Rachel had taken the job within a week of arriving. She'd been interviewed by Mrs. Chen, the house manager, who'd looked up and down with calculating eyes and asked exactly 3 questions. Can you cook? Can you clean? Can you keep your mouth shut about what you see? Yes, yes, yes. She'd been hired on the spot. The Kang penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the most expensive building in Gangnam. Everything was white marble and glass, beautiful and cold, like living inside a diamond that might cut you if you touched the wrong edge. Rachel's room was small, tucked behind the kitchen, barely large enough for a single bed and a narrow dresser. But it had a lock on the door and a window overlooking the city, and that was more than she'd had in London at the end. She'd expected a monster. The files she'd accidentally seen on Mrs. Chen's desk during her interview, just a glimpse but enough, had painted James Kang as Seoul's most dangerous man. Money laundering, extortion, connections to every dirty deal in the city. He controlled the nightclubs, the politicians, the police. Untouchable, unstoppable, ruthless. So when she'd first seen him that morning in the kitchen, pouring his own coffee at 6 a.m., she'd been prepared for someone terrifying. Instead, she'd found a tired man in an expensive suit with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens too heavy to share. He'd glanced at her, nodded once, and said in perfect English, "You must be the new housemaid. There's a dietary restrictions list on the refrigerator. My wife is allergic to shellfish." His voice had been deep, measured, completely empty of emotion. But his eyes, God, his eyes had been hollow in a way that Rachel recognized. She'd seen that look in her own mirror during the months after David, the look of someone going through the motions without remembering why. "Yes, Mr. Kang," she'd replied in Korean, keeping her voice soft and respectful. Something had flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? His eyebrows had lifted slightly. "Your Korean is excellent." "Thank you, sir. I studied before coming." He'd opened his mouth as if to say something else, then closed it, nodded again, and left. The entire interaction had lasted maybe 30 seconds, but Rachel's hands had been shaking as she listened to his footsteps fade down the marble hallway. Not from fear, from the unsettling realization that the man she'd been warned about felt nothing like the monster everyone described. Then, Victoria had appeared. She'd glided into the kitchen like a ghost, all pale skin and sharp cheekbones, wearing a white silk robe that probably cost more than Rachel's entire year's salary. She'd looked Rachel up and down with eyes like chips of ice, her lip curling just slightly. "So you're the new help," she'd said in Korean, not bothering to check if Rachel understood. "Let me make the rules very clear. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't make eye contact with my husband. You don't touch anything that isn't related to your duties, and you certainly don't exist in any meaningful way in this household. Are we clear?" Rachel had bowed her head. "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Victoria's smile had been razor-sharp, because the last girl who forgot her place had to be sent home, and trust me, you don't want to know what sent home means in this family. The threat had hung in the air like poison. Victoria had swept out of the kitchen, leaving behind expensive perfume and casual cruelty. And Rachel had thought, not for the first time since arriving in Seoul, that maybe monsters came in more than one form. The first week had been about learning patterns. James left every morning at 6:30. Victoria rarely emerged from her wing of the penthouse before noon. They had separate bedrooms on opposite ends of the apartment. They took meals separately. On the rare occasions when they occupied the same room, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. They spoke to each other with the warmth of business associates negotiating a hostile merger. James had expected a lot of things, but not this. Not a marriage that was clearly a corpse no one had bothered to bury. She'd used her invisibility well. While dusting, she'd observed. While cooking, she'd listened. While serving dinner on the rare occasions they ate together, she'd memorized the dynamics. This wasn't just a cold marriage, this was warfare conducted with silence in space. But 2 weeks in, something had shifted. It was close to midnight. Rachel couldn't sleep, her mind churning through homesickness and regret, and the constant question of whether she'd made the right choice coming here. She'd wandered to the library, that massive room lined with books in Korean, English, and Chinese. She'd pulled out a volume, a collection of Korean poetry translated into English, and settled into the leather chair by the window. Can't sleep? She jerked around so fast the book had fallen from her hands. James stood in the doorway, still in his dress shirt and slacks from whatever meeting he'd attended. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked different, more human, more dangerous in his humanity. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Kang," Rachel had stammered, reaching for the book. "I didn't mean to disturb anything. I'll go back." "You're reading Han Young-un." He'd stepped into the room, his eyes on the book in her hands. The silence of everything. Her heart had hammered. "Yes, sir." "What did you think of it?" The question had surprised her. "I think he understood loneliness, the kind that exists even when you're surrounded by people." James had moved to the window, looking out over Seoul's glittering skyline. His reflection in the glass had looked impossibly tired. Yes, his voice had been soft. He understood that very well. They'd stood in silence for a long moment. Rachel had felt the weight of it, the loneliness radiating off him like heat. "Why do you read poetry at midnight, Mr. Kang?" "Same reason you do, I imagine." He'd glanced at her. "To feel less alone." Their eyes had met, and something had shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. "What's your name?" he'd asked quietly. "Your real name, not just the housemaid." "Rachel. Rachel Okonkwo." "Rachel." He'd repeated it like he was testing how it felt. "Where are you from?" "London, originally, but my parents are from Nigeria." "And you came to Seoul to work as a housemaid?" His tone wasn't judgmental, just curious. She'd made a split-second decision. Sometimes running away is easier than staying and facing what broke you. Understanding had flickered across his face. "Yes, sometimes it is." He'd moved toward the door, then paused. "The library is open to you, anytime. Don't hide in your room, Rachel. This house is lonely enough without you disappearing too." Then he'd left, and Rachel had sunk back into the chair, her hands trembling, her carefully constructed walls suddenly feeling much thinner. Because she'd heard it in his voice, the same loneliness that kept her awake at night, the same exhaustion from pretending everything was fine. Two people living in a beautiful prison, both utterly alone. It was the most dangerous kind of connection, the kind that made you forget why you'd built walls in the first place. After that night, things changed. Small things, subtle things. James started taking his coffee in the kitchen in the mornings. He'd make small talk about books, about Seoul, about nothing and everything. Victoria would sweep through and the warmth would drain from the room instantly, but in those moments before she appeared, Rachel had glimpses of who James might be without the weight of his world on his shoulders. And she'd catch him looking at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, when Victoria said something particularly cruel, when the mask slipped and the loneliness showed through. Rachel knew she should keep her distance, should remember her place, should protect herself. But loneliness recognizes loneliness, and wounded souls are drawn to each other like gravity. It was inevitable, really. The moment in the kitchen at midnight, the confession that had tumbled out of him like a prayer. Just one night, please. She should have said no, should have walked away, should have protected them both from what was about to happen. But when his lips met hers, when 3 months of tension finally broke between them, Rachel stopped thinking about should and started thinking about need. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers dug into his shoulders. They kissed like they were drowning, and each other was air. Desperate, hungry, breaking open. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James pressed his forehead to hers. "I can't offer you anything," he whispered. "I'm married. My world is dangerous. This is impossible," Rachel finished. "I know." "Then why?" "Because I'm tired of being invisible," she pulled back to meet his eyes. "Because when you look at me, I exist. Because loneliness is killing me slowly, and for one night, I want to feel alive." His eyes searched hers. "One night." "Just one night," she nodded, even as her heart screamed that one night would never be enough. No expectations, no promises. Just tonight, just tonight. He agreed, but they both knew it was a lie, because some connections can't be contained to one night. Some fires, once lit, consume everything. They'd gone to his bedroom, the one he slept in alone, far from Victoria's wing. He'd kissed her like she was sacred, like she was a miracle he couldn't believe he was allowed to touch. Rachel had given him something she'd been saving, something she'd always thought would matter more than this. But in that moment, with James looking at her like she hung the moon, it had felt right. Afterward, they'd laid tangled in expensive sheets, the Seoul skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. "I've never—" James had stopped, started again. "That was your first time?" His eyes had widened. "Yes." She'd traced patterns on his chest. "Don't freak out. It was my choice." "Rachel." His voice had been raw. "If I'd known—" "What? You wouldn't have touched me?" She'd met his gaze. "I'm glad you didn't know. I'm glad I gave you this. I wanted to. Why me? Because you see me." She smiled sadly. "Because in 3 months, you've made me feel more real than anyone in my entire life. Because loneliness is worse than regret." He'd pulled her closer, kissed her forehead. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but we don't always get what we deserve, do we? We get what we choose. And you chose this? Chose me for tonight." She'd closed her eyes. "I chose you." They'd made love twice more before dawn, each time slower, more intentional, like they were memorizing each other's bodies for the famine they knew was coming. As the sun started to rise, Rachel had slipped from his bed, gathering her clothes. "Don't go," James had said, his hand catching her wrist. "Stay." "I can't. Morning means reality, and reality means your wife will be awake soon. This doesn't have to end." "Yes, it does." She'd cupped his face. "We both know that. This was beautiful, James. Don't ruin it by pretending it can be more. What if I want more? Then you're going to get hurt." Her thumb had brushed his cheekbone. "And I care about you too much to watch that happen." She'd kissed him one last time, soft, final, and left. But as she'd closed the door behind her, she'd heard his voice, barely a whisper. "Too late, Rachel. I'm already hurt." The next week had been torture. They'd moved around each other like ghosts, close enough to feel, too far to touch. Victoria had watched them with calculating eyes, her suspicion growing. On Friday night, Victoria had thrown a dinner party. Important guests, people who mattered. Rachel had served courses silently, invisible again. She'd watched Victoria play the perfect wife, touching James's hand, laughing at jokes, performing for their audience. And she'd watched James endure it, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. When the guests had finally left, when Victoria had retreated to her room, James had found Rachel in the kitchen. "I can't do this," he'd said without preamble. I can't pretend I don't want you. You have to. She'd kept washing dishes, not looking at him. We both have to. Leave her. Come with me. We'll figure it out. And go where, James? Rachel had finally turned. You're one of the most powerful men in Seoul. Your wife's family is connected to everyone who matters. You can't just walk away from that. Watch me. No. She'd stepped closer. I won't let you destroy your life for one night. It wasn't just one night. His hand had cupped her face. You know it wasn't. It has to be, because the alternative gets us both killed. She'd been right, but 3 days later, everything fell apart anyway. Victoria had found something, texts on James's phone, or maybe she'd simply watched them long enough to see the truth. Either way, her revenge had been swift. She'd invited her brothers to dinner, 3 men who worked in Seoul's criminal underworld, who owed their power to the Kang family's protection, who would do anything Victoria asked, including remove a problem. Rachel had been serving dessert when the youngest brother, Christopher, had grabbed her wrist. You're the one, he'd said in Korean, the one sleeping with Victoria's husband. The room had gone silent. I don't know what you're talking about. Rachel had tried to pull away, but his grip had tightened. Don't lie. Victoria's voice had been ice. I know everything, and now you're going to pay for disrespecting this family. James had stood so fast his chair had fallen. Let her go. Or what? Victoria had smiled. You'll defend your whore in front of everyone? Go ahead, James. Show them all how weak you've become. She's not... James had started. She's nothing. Victoria had cut him off. Just a servant who forgot her place. And servants who forget their place get reminded. Christopher had twisted Rachel's arm behind her back. She'd gasped in pain. Stop! James had moved forward, but Victoria's other brothers had blocked his path. This is what happens, Victoria had said softly, when you disrespect me, when you humiliate me, when you throw away everything for some girl who means nothing. She means everything. The words had exploded from James like a confession. Everything. The room had frozen. Victoria's face had contorted with rage. Then she'll die for it. Christopher! Do it and I'll burn your entire family to the ground. James's voice had been deadly quiet. Alliance be damned. I will destroy everything you care about. You'd start a war over a maid? Over Rachel. James had met her eyes across the room. Over the only person in my life who's real. Christopher had released Rachel's arm. She'd stumbled forward, and James had caught her, pulled her behind him. Get out, he'd said to Victoria's brothers. All of you. They'd looked at Victoria, who'd nodded once, her face twisted with fury. When they'd left, Victoria had turned to James. You've just signed both your death warrants. My family won't forgive this. Then I guess we're at war. James had pulled Rachel closer. Pack your things. You have 1 hour. Victoria had laughed, sharp and cruel. Where will you go? Everyone in this city answers to me or my family. You'll be dead by morning. Then we'll die together. James had looked down at Rachel. If you'll come with me. Rachel had stared up at him, this powerful, broken man who was about to lose everything for her, and made her choice. Yes. She'd taken his hand. Wherever you go, I go. They'd packed in 20 minutes. Cash, passports, 2 bags. James had made 3 phone calls to people he trusted, people who owed him favors that couldn't be bought by Victoria's family. By midnight, they'd been on a private plane to Tokyo. By dawn, they disappeared. 6 months later, Rachel stood on the balcony of their small apartment in Kyoto, watching cherry blossoms fall like snow. James came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Regrets? He asked quietly. She turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. About which part? Running away? Falling in love with you? Letting you give up everything? Any of it. Not one. She kissed him softly. Though, I wish it hadn't cost you so much. You didn't cost me anything, he smiled. You saved me from a life that was already over. You gave me a reason to be alive again. Still, she traced his jaw. You were powerful, wealthy. respected. I was dying. His forehead touched hers. You brought me back to life. They stood there as the sun rose over Kyoto, two people who'd lost everything and found something better. James had a new name now, a normal job. They lived simply, no penthouse, no staff, no empire, just a small apartment and each other. Victoria had divorced him quietly after 3 months. The scandal had been contained, the families had reached an uneasy truce. James's former empire had been divided among his lieutenants. He'd walked away from all of it for one night that had turned into forever. And Rachel had found that sometimes the most dangerous choice, the most impossible choice, was the only one worth making. Because love wasn't supposed to be safe. It wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be real. And this beautiful, complicated, hard-won thing they'd built was the most real thing either of them had ever known. "What now?" she asked, looking up at him. "Now we live." He kissed her forehead. "We wake up every day and choose each other. We build something new. We be happy." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He pulled her closer. "No empire, no power, no walls. Just us." "Just us," she agreed. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If this story grabbed you, don't leave without subscribing. Hit that like button if you believe in love that costs everything and gives it all back. Drop a comment telling me what you'd sacrifice for the person you love. Would you walk away from power? From safety? From everything you know? Let me know, because I read every single comment. New stories drop every week, and trust me, they get even more intense. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous thing isn't falling in love. It's pretending you haven't already fallen.